Dallas Heritage Village's old Renner Schoolhouse.
We figure you kids might miss school just a little bit, so we're here to give you a history lesson, a Texas history legend.
This is a true legend, but not the kind you normally think of. You see, this legend has long horns and 4 legs.
It was a legendary Longhorn steer whose name is Old Blue, and this is his story. Old Blue was born late in the Civil War, that's about the 1860s late, and he was born in South Texas because during the war, people let their cattle run wild. There was no ranchers and ranchers. So these Longhorns bred into millions, and they were available because they were unbranded, and anybody who wanted them could have them.
Now, one rancher came down to South Texas to claim some of these free Longhorns was Colonel Charles Goodnight. Maybe you've heard of him. They named the Goodnight Trail after him, and he's also known as the father of the Texas Panhandle.
Now, Charles Goodnight and his cowboys rounded up about 2,000 head. That's a pretty good size herd for a trail drive. And they were going to take them up north to Charles Goodnight's ranch, which he had in the corner of Colorado.
Now, on this trail drive, they rode around the western edge of the Edwards Plateau.
And then when they hit the Pecos River, they followed it northwest for a long ways.
And then they turned due north and drove those cattle straight across the staked plains of the southern Panhandle.
And then across the high plains, all the way through the Panhandle of Texas.
And then they crossed the Panhandle of Oklahoma.
And then through the corner of Kansas, straight into Colorado on the Arkansas River, where Charles Goodnight had his ranch.
Now, during this trip, all of the cowboys and Colonel Goodnight couldn't help but notice that each and every day in the lead was this blue-headed steer. It seemed that he had kind of a wanderlust, a curiosity. He wanted to know what lay ahead. But not only that, all the other cattle just seemed to hold him in respect, and they followed him each and every day.
Now, when Charles Goodnight had those cattle rested and fattened, he started selling them off to make money for his ranch. And when it came to selling Old Blue, though, Charles Goodnight said, "This is too good a steer to sell for me." So they broke into the yoke, and they made a work oxen out of him and sold him to a local farmer so he could live a long life.
Now, a few years later, Colonel Goodnight moved his ranch down into the Panhandle of Texas in an area that you know as Paladura Canyon today.
And this was a great big spread, and they had lots of Longhorns there getting fattened up. And we're going to go on a trail drive to the northern railhead. When Charles Goodnight went into Kitty, Texas to get supplies. And when he did, he saw somebody he recognized.
Down the road came a farm wagon being pulled by a blue-headed steer. He recognized it immediately as Old Blue. He offered that farmer money, good money, and the farmer sold him immediately. And Colonel Goodnight took Old Blue back to his J.A. ranch.
Now, the cowboys at the J.A. were happy to see their old friend, and they knew exactly what to do with him. He would be their lead steer when they took that herd north in the fall.
Now, to get the cattle used to Old Blue, they hung a bell around his neck. And they discovered pretty quickly that it worked really well, because every time Old Blue shook his head and that bell rang, all the other cattle would look up to see where Blue was going. why, they had to start putting stuff up inside the bell, like scraps of leather or cloth or even handfuls of grass, because if old Blue shook his head in the middle of the night, all the cattle would get up to see where old Blue was going.
Well, it was in 1878 when they had that first big trail drive. Those 2,000 head of cattle were trail broke and headed north, straight up to Dodge City.
Now, when they finally arrived at Dodge City, they didn't quite reach the town, and it was late in the afternoon. And the trail boss decided it would be best to wait till the next morning. So they camped out on 7 Mile Hill, just on the other side of the Arkansas River from Dodge City. And there were several other ranchers camped out there as well with their cattle.
Now, the trail boss was watching always, and this time he saw a big cloud bank developing in the northwest. And he told his cowboys to stay saddled up, take turns, keep the herd held tight, because it looks like we're getting some weather.
And he was right. Just about midnight, a blue norther blew in, and it started snowing so hard you couldn't see your hand in front of your face.
Why, the other ranchers lost a lot of their cattle. They were scattered in the storm, but the J.A. ranch, they were ready. They held those herd tight until finally dawn broke.
And when they could see well enough, one of the cowboys reached over and pulled the stuffing out of old Blue's bell. Old Blue shook his head, and then he knew exactly what to do.
He led that herd straight down to the Arkansas River. He plunged into the river and swam across, and all 2,000 head followed him. When he got up on that north bank and shook his head, he knew exactly where to go. He went straight down Main Street all the way to the stock pens at the railhead.
Why, it was years after that that the folks in Dodge City would talk about being woken up that morning by the pounding of 8,000 hooves going down the middle of Dodge City, Kansas.
Now, when they had finally settled up, all the head counted and the money paid, they stocked up that chuck wagon again and headed a leisurely trip back south to the farm, to the ranch.
And the whole way, old Blue followed along with the cowboys. And on that trip, old Blue developed a most peculiar habit for a Longhorn. He developed a love for cowboy chow.
Now, the cookie was a little upset when he found old Blue raiding the food, but the cowboys, they said, no, this ain't a steer, this is a cowboy like us. Let him have all he wants.
So he ate beans and biscuits, and he really loved bacon.
And old Blue developed that lifelong habit of eating cowboy chow, which led to usefulness later in his life.
Now, the cowboys had grown so attached to Blue and were convinced that he was a cowboy just like them. So much so that on that trip back home, they had camped out one night on the Wolf River, and in the middle of the night, a group of Kiowa raiders came in intent on having old Blue for their supper. And those cowboys put their life on the line, making sure that Blue was saved.
Now, when they finally got back to the J.A. ranch, they put old Blue out to pasture to rest up, and he lived a life of relatively luxury, because, you see, there was only one thing they used him for.
Well, yeah, they did use him for that once-a-year trail drive, but they also had another occasional job for him because he could do it better than any other cowboys. And that is, he could bring in outlaw steers, those steers who got away from the rest of the herd.
And when they'd find an outlaw steer up a draw, the cowboys would have to rope him and drag him back, and that was a lot of hard work. So when they saw an outlaw steer, they'd go get old Blue. Yeah,
All they had to do was put a rope around his neck and then lasso the other end of that rope, throw it around the horns of that outlaw steer.
And Old Blue, a big, strong, 12-rope ox, why, he drugged that outlaw steer all the way back to the ranch headquarters because he knew when he got back, he would get himself a plate of cowboy chow.
Now, Old Blue worked for the J.A. Ranch for 20 years.
That's all the time of the cowboy era. By then, the railheads had come closer and closer when there were no more cattle drives, and Old Blue finally passed away.
Now, Colonel Goodnight couldn't bear to part with Old Blue without keeping some kind of memento. So he took Old Blue's horns and had them mounted and hung over the J.A. Ranch headquarters.
And they remained there as a symbol of the J.A. Ranch for a long while until, well, finally the ranch was sold and the ranch headquarters were torn down, but those horns of legendary Old Blue, they were sent to the Panhandle Plains Museum right there nearby in Canyon, Texas.
And if you go to the Panhandle Plains Museum today, you can see Old Blue's horns. And while you're up there, stop by and walk around Paladura Canyon so you can stand on some of the same land that Colonel Goodnight and Old Blue stood on.